guys, welcome back, and today we're doing another one of our design style series, which I know really helps you guys out. And this time it's one that you voted on, so this is for you. And today we're going over all about traditional design, kind of what it is and how to get it. Now, as always with our design style series, we have to jump into our history book for a second and take a look at understanding why we're seeing what we're seeing. And believe me, with traditional design, the subcategories are huge. There's a ton of them. But there's a super easy way to kind of understand and think about it. If you think about the fact that basically everything before the modern design era, which started around the turn of the 20th century, is actually considered traditional. It falls into that category. Now, there's a number of them we can look at. For instance, there's ancient Roman, otherwise known as, otherwise known as the original classic design. You can see it in this X-Base campaign chair from that period. There's Gothic and medieval. Oh my gosh, they were producing chairs by this point and they were super detailed. There's Jacobean. That's an interesting look. There's Queen Anne, which came kind of right around the same era. Then think about the Louis, 15 and 16. Both very different leg styles, but they definitely kind of tie together and are very similar in time frame. There's the Regency era. Now, if you saw my video on Bridgerton series, that goes in depth into the Regency period and all the fantastic things that happened during that time frame. And you hit all the way up to Art Nouveau, which is right at that tipping point before the modern era actually begins. And all of these styles developed prior to World War I. And you can absolutely see the difference in how the materials are used and how everything is approached the minute you hit Art Deco. Like, look at this chair. This chair doesn't feel like anything else we've seen up until now. So if you want to know more about the modern styles and things that came after World War I, you definitely want to take a look at my Mega Modern video that dives in depth into everything that started from there and moving forward. So what are some of the cues or elements that we can take to understand when something is actually a traditional design statement? Well, let me show you. Things will always be very balanced and symmetrical, both in layouts and in kind of the display of decor. You can sort of see that in this picture with the green walls. You know, everything is sort of balanced and paired off together. That's a very traditional, formal style statement. The next thing that's always a cue for traditional design is lots of rich colors. So, for instance, dyes were very expensive. So the more dye that was used, the more pricey and valuable a product was. So the more expensive you were able to afford, the more color you included into your spaces. Look at this rich red room in somebody's major palace. That's absolutely gorgeous. And you also had a lot of things like gilt and silver leaf finishes. Those were also signs of luxury and wealth. A third element that you can always see when you see traditional design is carved ornamentation. You can see it as early as some of those medieval chairs. They definitely had lots of worked backs. So that was a look that expressed wealth and abundance. Flooring was often done with higher end natural materials. So you see tons of wood and of course natural stone. They really didn't have anything like carpet other than area rugs that were very expensive and beautiful, and many of them just hung on the walls. Another tip is sort of a hierarchical story with the reference points. Now, what do I mean by that? The most money and attention would be applied typically to the rooms that were the public rooms. So a sitting salon, a dining area, those things were done in a very ornate style. And often bedrooms and or private spaces would be considered less important in terms of their ornamentation and decor. Well, you can't forget window treatments, because remember, at this point, none of these buildings had any level of conditioning at all. They had no heating other than fires, etc. So window treatments were very important. So they often were very heavy, very ornamental, very sort of decorated and formal. So you see a lot of attention paid to them. The last cue that you can always take a look at with traditional design is how they've approached their artwork. It's always usually formalized. So there'll be pairs, or there's something there in the center of the room that's really major and important. There was nothing that was done that was casual or informal in the approach to artwork, because it was so rare and expensive and hard to acquire that it became the central focal point for the spaces, or the pairs did. So that's always a set of traditional cues. Now, don't worry, don't panic. If your eyes are rolling back in your head, don't sweat it. I've got 6 easy steps to help you on how to do traditional for your space in a way that makes sense and expresses the style. Now, before I go there, let me just check in with you guys. If there's anybody who's watching and hasn't hit that button and rang that bell, go ahead, do it. We're waiting. Okay, now, you can mix traditional styles, but you definitely need to define the subcategories that you're going to lean towards as your most important, say, pair of categories, and try to keep it to 2 subcategories mainly. Now, for example, you could pair the 2 Louis together, Louis XV and Louis XVI. One has a very different set of decor than the other, but they are paired well together. Or, for instance, Jacobean and Queen Anne. Those would mix well together and be happy. They're sort of similar on the chronological timeline, so they mix well and it's not a problem. Here's the tips for doing it for yourself. The number one thing that you want to always think about is you have to look at your architecture. For example, if you're living in a Spanish colonial style house, you're really not going to be able to swing the Louis very well, because Spanish colonial is a very different time frame, and architecturally it has smooth arches and plaster walls and wood beams and exposed, and that doesn't really fit kindly with something that's much more formalized and out of the Baroque era. So take a look at your architecture first. So the second thing that you want to consider is how you can do a kind of formalized layout of your furniture. So if you're looking at trying to do an L-sectional, skip it. That was nothing like that in traditional. You'll want to do a pair of sofas facing each other, or a pair of chairs both facing the fireplace together. That would be a formalized layout. So you want to think in those terms. The third thing that you want to consider is your flooring surfaces. Because I mentioned earlier that they basically utilized wood and natural stones and things of that nature, there wasn't a lot of, concrete and carpet and things like that available. So if you've got wall to wall, you're gonna have to work a little harder in kind of the decor and the palette color to sort of make that work. And if that is wall to wall, kind of keep it on the neutral side if that's what you're going for. Next tip is always more is more. And all you maximalists out there are gonna love that, because decor, there's just more of it in traditional style. There was a lot more of things that they used in spaces, and they were all decorated. So you can kind of get away with an extra couple of layers of decor in your space in a traditional statement, easy peasy. And then the last thing that you want to make sure that you're considering is your palette, because the rich colors that we see kind of in these traditional spaces are very much a reflection of how valuable and expensive deep dyes were to attain at that time frame. And so the more of that you use in your palette, the more it emphasizes that traditional aspect of things. Now, it doesn't have to necessarily go dark, but it does have to be saturated. So you can think of emerald greens and rich yellows and golden tones, and all of those colors are absolutely right on track for any traditional space. Now guys, those are 6 easy tips to figure out how to incorporate traditional design style statements into your space. But one of the things I strongly recommend is, because traditional can tend to be very complex in its composition, you want to make sure you've got an organized inspiration direction before you start spending any money. So for all of you guys that are in the design club, you definitely want to head over to the section that has the Pinterest system that I use here in my office and utilize that to help you keep everything organized all the way down through the project. And if you haven't already joined the design club, you guys have definitely got to check that out. We have so many resources in there. We do Q&As. There's lots of master classes and information. There's already a huge library of information about finding out your paint colors and really helping you engage your innate designer inside you to kind of come up with a fabulous project for your home. Now, before you go, I want you to go over here to this button, and we put together a special playlist of all the design style videos because there's so many out there, and we want to make sure that you can check it. So just click this button and it'll take you right through and just yummy, yummy, have a great time. I'll see you guys next week.